Many years ago, the famous author and speaker John Gray, who wrote the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, came to our synagogue to speak on the topic of men and women. We just had completed our mikveh, and I told him, John, would you like to see our mikveh? And he came into the mikveh and he said, wow, this is great. I love the mikveh. I say, what do you mean you love the mikveh? He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. Mikveh is the greatest secret for a happy marriage. I say, how do you know that? He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. When couples come to me and they tell me, John, we're not getting along together, I say right away, well, for the first week, you should separate. Go home, sleep in separate rooms, and don't touch each other. Simply talk, communicate verbally, and in 1 week you'll come back and we'll discuss your problems. The couple comes back a week later and they say, John, we're so sorry. We couldn't stay apart for more than 2-3 days. We had to get back together. So we hope you can still work with us. And Dr. John Gray would say, well, that was my objective. My objective was you should get back together, and absence makes the heart grow fonder. And therefore he says, I really love the concept of mikveh, because mikveh says that men and women should separate. And through that separation, after the woman immerses in the mikveh, now they come back together and they really unite. So I told him, if that's the case, that you really like the concept of mikveh, why don't you put it in your next book? He says, Rabbi, the truth is I'm not a rabbi, and I'm not an authority on mikveh, so I can't really say that. But one-on-one, I could tell that to you. In truth, this concept of absence makes the heart grow fonder is really what the Gemara itself states in the Tractate of Nida, page 31, side 2. The Gemara says over there, Tanya, Hoye Rab Meir Eimer. Rab Meir would say, Nida l'shiva. Why is it that the Torah says that a woman who's a nida should separate from her husband? And the Gemara says, Kedei shetehei chaviva al baila kishas knisasa l'chuppah, so that she should be beloved by her husband the same way now like she was when she first entered into the chuppah on the day of their marriage. Rabbi Moshe Tendler once said that when he was speaking to the Rebbe at a Yechidus, he once had a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him the following. He says, many people think that when you're dealing with a couple who's becoming closer to Yiddishkeit, to Judaism, that you first talk about, other mitzvahs like kosher and charity and things like that. And later, when you see they're really, really connected, then you go into the whole concept of mikveh and family purity. The Rebbe said the opposite is true. The first thing you should talk to them about is the concept of mikveh. And Rabbi Tendler elaborated on that. And he said, today we find there's so many problems with relationships. People simply can't get a handle on it. They don't know what to do. How do we get back in touch with each other? How do we really have this passion in our marriage? And he said, the Rebbe was correct, that the first thing you have to talk about is mikveh, for this is all about the foundation of marriage and bringing passion back into your marriage. I once spoke to a lawyer in downtown Brooklyn, and he was telling me how he has, this girlfriend in Florida, and every 6 months he visits her and he has fireworks. And I said to him, I really feel bad for you. You have to wait for 6 months to have fireworks. In every Jewish home, every month there's fireworks. The night the wife comes back from mikveh, there's fireworks. So this concept of mikveh has many, many positive side effects. And the first positive side effect is that it truly brings passion back into the marriage. There are, however, many misconceptions about mikveh. When I first started here in Brooklyn Heights, one of the first Shabbosim that we had here, a girl came over to me and she started asking me all of these questions. And she said, you know, how come women are impure? How come women have to go to mikveh? Why aren't men impure? How come Torah is so male chauvinistic? And I said to her, first and foremost, you're making a mistake. It's true that women go to mikveh once a month, and this applies only to married women, not to single women. However, Hasidic men go to mikveh every morning before davening. So we go 30 times a month instead of 1 time a month. Number 2 is, in truth, the concept of a woman becoming impure when she becomes a nida. So first and foremost, it's important to note that the idea of tumah, which we translate to mean impure, the word tumah literally means a blockage. In other words, if the door is blocked, you are not allowed to enter. And so, when a woman becomes nida, when she menstruates, according to Torah law, there is tumah, there is a blockage, and therefore the husband is not allowed to enter. Now, it's no sin to be in a state of tumah. You could be in that state of tumah all your life. However, if the husband wants to enter, then the wife needs to go into the mikveh. Furthermore, the concept of tumah, of impurity, only applies to Jews. Why? Because only something that is holy can become unholy. Something which is not holy to begin with cannot become tamei, cannot become impure. And that is why the Kabbalah says that the powers of klipa, the powers of unholiness, needs to nourish itself through holiness. And therefore it siphons the holiness and it acquires vitality. Because true life, chaim, is only through holiness. As we say in the Torah, "V'atem adveikim b'Hashem elikechem," today you cleave unto God, chaim kulchem hayom. You are therefore all alive today. True life is holiness, cleaving unto God. And therefore even the powers of impurity in the world need to hang on and to siphon this power from holiness. When they do that, then one becomes impure, one becomes unholy. And it's interesting to note the history of nida, the history of menstruation. The Talmud says in the Tractate of Eruvin, page 100, side 2, that after Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, so God brought many curses upon Adam and Eve. One of the curses was menstruation. In other words, menstruation is something which is abnormal. It's an abrogation to creation. When God first created the world, there was not supposed to be this concept of nida, of menstruation. However, because of the sin of the Garden of Eden, so God brought this concept of menstruation into the world. So it's logical that because this loss of blood came about because of the sin, therefore it would automatically make the person who menstruates impure, because the source of this blood is from impurity. However, it's not a punishment. Jews are like the land of Israel. They are a holy people, Goy Kodesh, a holy nation. And holiness cannot tolerate something that is unholy. So what happens is the body, once a month, ejects and banishes all the unholiness and all the toxins that are found within the body. And when the body expels these toxins, because they are toxins, that individual becomes unholy. So that is the concept of nida. That is the concept of menstruation. But again, it's not a sin. You can stay in that state of tumah all your life. And then by going to mikveh, or the deeper reason of this menstruation is really, as the Gemara says, to create a separation between husband and wife. And through that separation, there's a greater bond, a greater passion that now exists between the both of them. But why is it that the woman becomes unholy, or why the woman has the nida, is because in Kabbalah, in Judaism, a woman is considered to be more sensitive to impurity, and a woman comes from a greater level of purity. As the Gemara says, Bina Yiseda Nitna L'Isha, a greater level of understanding was given to the woman. A greater level of sensitivity was given to the woman. And we find that King Solomon says, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, the woman of valor is the crown of her husband. In other words, she understands these things even more. And she is compared to the Holy Land of Israel. And therefore, she is the one that needs to expel this impurity from the body. It's also important to note what the Arizal says, that husband and wife are really two halves of a whole. And therefore, when a woman is nida, the man is also nida. In other words, the man is also separate from his wife. Not only does the wife separate from her husband, but the husband must also separate from the wife. And by the fact that the husband encourages the wife to go to mikveh, and tells the wife how proud he is that she is fulfilling this holy mitzvah, the husband also gets the credit. In other words, just like when the husband puts on the tefillin, the wife gets the credit for the tefillin, being that she is half the soul of the husband. By the fact that the woman goes to the mikveh and observes the laws of purity and family purity, the husband is also acquiring part of that mitzvah. So really, it's a joint mitzvah. It's a partnership that both husband and wife complement and support one the other. Another side benefit for mikvah is children. It's a segula for zara, chaya v'kayama. It's a good omen to have children, number one, healthy children, and children that will live a long life. Because every mitzvah, besides the fact that the mitzvah is God's command, and the mitzvah itself connects us with God, a higher reality, every mitzvah also has its side effects. Every mitzvah has its benefits. And therefore, this mitzvah of nida, or the mitzvah of mikvah, has the side effect or the benefit of producing healthy and many good children. Another misconception is, many years ago I spoke to a woman about going to mikveh, and she said, "Ugh, I would never do that." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, my mother told me the mikveh is dirty and there are things swimming in it." I said, "Excuse me, come down right now, I want to show you our mikveh." And I brought her into the mikveh, and I said, "You see, what you're saying cannot be any farther from the truth." And on the contrary, even Oprah came to our mikveh. And she said, "This mikveh is a spa. It's amazing. It's gorgeous." And in truth, that is the way you're supposed to make a mikveh. It should be something which is inviting and even enticing to bring the person in to see the beauty of the mikveh. Another misconception is that years ago, there was no modern plumbing, and people had to go to public baths. And therefore, a woman, after she menstruated, went to the public bath. But again, this is not true, because in halacha, in the Talmud, these laws that were passed down from Moses at Sinai tell us that before a woman goes to the mikveh, she must first physically clean herself. And that today most women immerse or soak in a bath from 20 minutes to a half an hour, simply to become physically squeaky clean. And after they are physically squeaky clean, then they make sure that there are no foreign objects that separate them and the water. Only after that do they enter into the water of the mikveh, which means the waters of the mikveh are really a spiritual transformation, not a physical transformation. And that is why, according to Jewish law and mysticism, the mikveh needs to have 40 sa'ah, which is a Talmudic measure, which equals about 160 to 200 gallons of water. But the concept of 40 represents transformation. And that is why the flood that God brought upon the world after or during the time of Noah was to purify the world like a mikveh. And therefore Noah started all over again on a much higher level and brought the world to a new level of purity. So the mikveh is clean, and it's filterized and chlorinated, hygienic and immaculate. And there's no reason why one should not go to the mikveh today. And this is not only true for younger women who are capable of having children or do menstruate, but this is even true for women that have menopause. A woman who never went to mikveh before, even now, should go to mikveh if she is married. And not only will she continue to live in holiness and purity, but the going to the mikveh now will have an effect retroactively on her previous life. And I want to tell you an amazing story. Right here in our synagogue, there was a young man who told me that his grandmother in 1905 came to Bismarck, North Dakota. And she had 4 daughters. And Bismarck, North Dakota, was known to be a place where many German immigrants came there. And so her daughters tried to stay away from Judaism and religion. And one of her daughters, Beatrice, actually became an atheist. And she did this as a defense mechanism, so that not to get caught up in politics. In the later years, they moved to Minnesota. And Beatrice got married, had a daughter, and her daughter Esther had an encounter with Chabad. And there she studied in Beis Chana, and Rabbi Friedman taught her and became her mentor, and Esther now became religious. She became frum, and she married a nice young Chabad chassid. And she was married to him for a number of years, and unfortunately, she could not have children. She went to mikveh every month, like she was supposed to. She studied the laws of mikveh to make sure she was doing the right things. And she even went to doctors and tried in vitro fertilization and other such things to try to have children. So she writes a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and she says to the Rebbe, you know, the situation. And she receives a few days later a call from Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary. And Rabbi Groner tells her the Rebbe has suggested that you ask your mother to go to mikveh. So Esther asks her mother, Mom, would you like to go to mikveh? You know, I'm having a difficulty having children, and, you know, this could help. The mom, being an atheist, says, look, I don't know what going into water has to do with having children. I'm not doing it. So Esther writes back to the Rebbe that I asked my mother, and she refuses to go. Again, Rabbi Groner calls her back, and he says, the Rebbe has suggested that you ask your grandmother to go to mikveh. Her grandmother, Jenny, was still alive. And she was married to her husband, Levi Yitzchak. And she said, Grandma, you know, I'm trying to have a child, and I want to give you a great-grandchild. And, you know, I'm going to mikveh every month, and I'm trying to do all the right things. And I went to doctors, and nothing helped. And then the Lubavitcher Rebbe told me, if you go to mikveh, I will have a child. Jenny asks her husband, Levi Yitzchak, what do you say? He says, what do I say? What wouldn't a grandparent do for a grandchild? Of course you should go to the mikveh. So Jenny now goes to the mikveh. A month later, Esther becomes pregnant. And after that, she had 9 children. What do we see here? We see here not only is it a mitzvah for you to go to mikveh for yourself, but going to mikveh has an effect on your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren for generations to come. And furthermore, it's never too late. If you haven't gone to mikveh, go now to mikveh. And tell your children you're going to mikveh. And inspire them that they should go to mikveh too. There was a parent that had a problem with her daughter. The daughter had emotional issues. And they wrote to the Rebbe for a blessing. And the Rebbe said, find out if the parents went to mikveh and that this daughter was born in tahara, if this daughter was born in purity. The Rebbe at one occasion said that we find in many holy books that the question is asked, how come there is a degeneration in our generation? Why is it that in this generation we have fallen from our spiritual heights compared to the generations in Europe and before that? And our holy rabbis tell us one of the reasons for this is a lack of mikveh observance. Because when a child is born after the mother has gone to mikveh, the soul is wrapped in a holy levush, in a holy garment, and this garment protects the soul, and this garment inspires the soul, and this garment warms the soul. But if you lack that holy garment, then the soul is susceptible to all these impurities and toxins of the world around us. And similarly, there was a mother who wrote to the Rebbe that her child was living with a non-Jewish woman, with a goy, and she was all upset. And here too the Rebbe responded, find out if the child was born in purity, if the mother went to mikveh. And if not, it's never too late. We can always repair the damage. Tshuva, repentance, works retroactively. Even though time goes forward and we can never turn back time, that is true in the physical world. But when it comes to the spiritual world, through tshuva, tshuva is beyond time and space, and we have the ability to make things right. So number one, how do you make things right? Start going to mikveh now. Number two, try to influence other people to go to mikveh. A woman should try to influence at least 2 other women to go to mikveh. Number 3, increase in the giving of charity. Not so much in the amounts of charity, but how often you give the charity. In other words, to have a pushka, and every day to put a few coins in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening into the pushka. As the Rambam says, that every time you put a coin into the pushka, that alone is a mitzvah. And that will give atonement and bring atonement to that individual. It says that when the Mashiach will come, God will sprinkle the pure waters upon you, and you will truly be purified. And therefore, by keeping the laws of mikveh and following all of these concepts, this will no doubt hasten the coming of the Mashiach, will hasten the coming of the redemption, when God will bring the whole world to a level of purity, and He will erase all that is abnormal and all that is toxin and all that is unkosher, and bring about peace and harmony and purity, not only between husband and wife, but between God and His people and between all the nations of the world. So let's start doing mikveh today and make the world a better place.